I never expected a Saturday afternoon by my own backyard pool to turn into the kind of chaos you only see in movies. 1 minute, I was lounging with a cold drink, the sun reflecting off the water like 1,000 tiny diamonds. The next, I was staring at my HOA's president, Karen, storming across my lawn with her arms crossed and a glare that could curdle milk. She didn't even knock. She just pointed at my pool and barked, "This is illegal. You need to drain it immediately." I froze. Illegal? My pool had been inspected, permitted, and perfectly within all city and HOA regulations. But Karen wasn't listening. She was on a mission, clipboard in hand, ready to enforce rules that didn't exist. I tried to reason with her, calmly explaining that every inspection had passed. She didn't budge. Instead, she threatened fines, citations, and even legal action. I watched in disbelief as she started marching toward the pool's edge, muttering about water safety codes I had never heard of. That's when things escalated in a way I could never have anticipated. I called the police, not to press charges, but to get an impartial witness. Moments later, 2 officers arrived, uniforms crisp, badges gleaming in the sun. Karen, of course, launched into her rehearsed speech, pointing and waving as if the presence of the police would magically turn my pool into a crime scene. Instead, the officers inspected my backyard, their expressions slowly shifting from polite neutrality to barely contained amusement. They measured the pool, checked the permits, and even ran a quick verification call to the city. Everything was perfectly legal. Karen's face fell. She sputtered, flipping through her notes, desperately trying to prove a violation that didn't exist. The officers exchanged a knowing glance. Then came the moment that changed everything. One of the officers, a tall man with a calm demeanor, said, "You know, this pool is impressive. Why don't we let the neighborhood enjoy it?" Karen gasped, scandalized. But before she could protest, the officers were already rolling out plans for a weekend event, complete, with safety barriers, refreshments, and a neighborhood swim day. People who had once only waved awkwardly across fences were suddenly peeking over, intrigued by the idea of officially sanctioned fun. By the time Karen stormed off, fuming and muttering about authority overreach, my backyard had transformed from a private oasis into the center of a mini neighborhood festival. It was surreal, seeing kids running across the lawn, neighbors laughing, and my pool, the so-called illegal pool, being celebrated instead of condemned. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. Karen's obsession with rules was far from over, and the next few days would see her escalate in ways I never imagined. Just when I thought the pool debacle was behind me, Karen decided to escalate things in a way that could only be described as dramatic. The neighborhood had been buzzing all weekend about the police-sanctioned pool day. Children splashed, neighbors chatted, and I finally started to enjoy the fact that my illegal pool had become the highlight of the block. But Karen? She was fuming. And when she's fuming, you can be sure chaos follows. It started Monday morning. I noticed a thick stack of letters slipped under my front door. Each one bore the HOA logo in bold, official-looking print. Curiosity turned quickly into disbelief. Karen had drafted what seemed like a legal manifesto accusing me of multiple violations, some of which were so obscure I had to Google them just to understand. Her claims ranged from improper water aeration to excessive backyard brightness, as if the reflection off my pool tiles was somehow an actionable offense. I knew I had 2 options: ignore her or face the storm head-on. Choosing the latter, I called the HOA office to clarify, only to be met with sighs, excuses, and vague reassurances. Karen, however, wasn't satisfied with bureaucracy. She showed up at my door again, this time wielding her latest threat: a formal complaint to the city about public nuisance and potential danger to community aesthetics. She even brought a few neighbors along as witnesses. The police involvement from last weekend had emboldened me. I calmly invited her inside to review all permits, measurements, and inspection reports. But instead of listening, she launched into a tirade, waving papers, pointing fingers, and accusing me of mocking the rules. It was surreal. One moment, she was screaming about legality. The next, she was dramatically clutching her chest, convinced the pool would somehow lower property values across the entire community. Then the unthinkable happened. One of the officers from last weekend, Officer Diaz, showed up unexpectedly. Word had apparently spread, and he was curious about Karen's latest antics. His presence alone seemed to unnerve her. He casually walked through my backyard, nodded approvingly at the pool, and commented on how it was a perfect place for community gatherings. Karen's face turned red with frustration, realizing her campaign against me was not only failing but backfiring spectacularly. By the end of the day, whispers had spread through the neighborhood. Karen's credibility was slipping, while my illegal pool was now being praised as a safe, beautiful spot for neighbors to enjoy. I could hear kids planning their next swim, and adults discussing a potential weekend barbecue around the water. Karen, meanwhile, retreated to her home, plotting her next move. It was clear, this wasn't over. Karen's obsession had shifted into overdrive, and I had a feeling that what came next would make last weekend look calm by comparison. By midweek, the pool situation had transformed into a full-blown neighborhood phenomenon. The weekend event organized by the police had become the talk of the block. Parents were texting each other about organizing weekly swim days, and kids were practically living in my backyard after school. My illegal pool had somehow become the community's centerpiece, and Karen's anger was only growing. She had escalated her campaign, sending more letters, making calls to neighbors, and even attempting to recruit a small faction of residents to her cause. Her argument had shifted from legality to moral panic. According to her, allowing everyone to enjoy my backyard pool was setting a dangerous precedent and encouraging reckless behavior. Meanwhile, families who had previously avoided my house were now knocking on my door with towels, snacks, and smiles, clearly unimpressed by Karen's rhetoric. One afternoon, as I was setting up chairs for another small neighborhood swim gathering, I saw Karen marching down the street, clipboard in hand, with a small entourage following her lead. Her eyes were locked on me like a hawk spotting prey. I felt a strange mix of anticipation and amusement, knowing that whatever she planned, the officers from the weekend would likely intervene again if necessary. Sure enough, just as she reached my gate, Officer Diaz arrived, casually leaning against his patrol car. Karen's expression twisted into disbelief. "This isn't fair," she shouted. "You can't just let the community gather here. It's against the rules." Diaz simply smiled and asked her to step aside while he reviewed the permits once more. After a few minutes of tense back and forth, Karen huffed, muttered something about abuse of authority, and stormed off, clearly defeated in the moment. The following days were a revelation. Neighbors began taking turns hosting community swims, all inspired by my backyard oasis. Kids who had been too shy to interact before were now friends. Parents were sharing food and laughter, and even some skeptics who had supported Karen started coming around. My backyard, once a simple private pool, had become a place where bonds were forming, where the neighborhood felt alive, and where Karen's warning seemed increasingly ridiculous. Despite the joy, Karen's obsession hadn't faded. It had merely gone underground. I could sense her plotting, checking social media, and pacing her living room while imagining some grand gesture to reclaim her perceived authority. But the momentum had shifted. The police, the neighbors, and the undeniable charm of a sunlit pool had turned my once illegal pool into a symbol of community unity. It was a strange victory. I had set out to enjoy a quiet afternoon swim, and instead, I had sparked a movement that even Karen couldn't undo. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that her next move would be even more dramatic, more unpredictable, and perhaps more absurd than anything that had happened so far. The following weekend felt like a turning point. Word had spread throughout the neighborhood that my pool, once the target of Karen's wrath, was officially a community hotspot. I woke up to see children racing down the street with goggles, pool noodles in hand and parents juggling coolers, snacks and beach chairs. Even neighbors who had once supported Karen's complaints were now helping set up safety barriers, folding chairs, and temporary shade tents. My backyard had transformed into a lively, organized pool festival. Karen, of course, had to make an appearance. She arrived mid-morning, face red with fury, and stormed straight to my front gate, muttering about HOA bylaws and unacceptable public gatherings. But something had shifted since the first confrontation. The police presence from the previous weekend had become permanent. Officer Diaz had dropped by to supervise, and his calm authority was enough to prevent any dramatic escalation. Karen glared, waved her clipboard, and tried to rally her small faction of dissenters, but it was clear she was losing ground. The real turning point came when Officer Diaz, with a knowing smile, announced that the event could continue legally under city and HOA oversight, and even encouraged neighbors to share responsibly. At first, Karen sputtered in disbelief, claiming bias, unfair treatment, and special privileges. But the neighbors were already siding with the pool. One by one, they waved, smiled, and even applauded as children splashed around, creating a cheerful symphony of laughter. Karen's authority, once intimidating, now seemed laughable in the face of community approval. By afternoon, something remarkable happened. Karen's attempts to shame or intimidate had backfired spectacularly. People were taking selfies by the pool, sharing videos on neighborhood social media groups, and praising the police for their involvement. My pool, once the center of accusations and threats, had become a symbol of unity and joy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen's obsession with rules had inadvertently turned my backyard into the most popular spot in the neighborhood. Even Karen herself couldn't escape the spectacle. While she hovered near the edge, glaring at the fun she couldn't control, I caught glimpses of her neighbors, subtly ignoring her complaints, exchanging knowing glances, and smiling at the pool's charm. It was a surreal sight. The woman who had once claimed my pool was illegal was now watching it flourish as a neighborhood attraction she could neither influence nor stop. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the sparkling water, I leaned back in a chair, listening to the laughter and chatter around me. What had started as a simple backyard swim had evolved into a full-blown community celebration. Karen's drama had unintentionally created something far greater than I could have imagined. A place where neighbors came together, children played safely, and the once illegal pool became legendary. In the end, rules may have been her weapon, but community, spirit, and a little help from the police turned her threats into triumph. And as Karen finally left, defeated but simmering, I realized something important. Sometimes, the best way to fight absurdity is to let joy, logic, and a sparkling pool do the talking. The pool was no longer just mine. It belonged to the neighborhood, and that made all the difference. Enjoying this wild HOA showdown? Hit that subscribe button to catch more unbelievable neighborhood stories. Give this a like if you loved seeing the illegal pool turn into a community hotspot. And drop a comment below. What would you do if your backyard became the talk of the block?